My son-in-law accused me of undermining their parenting and cut me off from my grandson. Months later, my daughter showed up at my door with a packed bag and a shocking revelation. I never thought I'd be in this situation. At 42, I'm finding myself struggling with my relationship with my only daughter, Heather, 28, her husband, Dennis, 30, and my precious grandson, Tyler, 18 months. It's a complicated mess that's been brewing for months, and I'm at my wit's end. To understand how we got here, I need to go back to the beginning. I had Heather when I was just 14 years old. It wasn't planned, and it certainly wasn't easy. Her father, my high school boyfriend, took off as soon as he found out I was pregnant. My parents were furious and kicked me out of the house. For a while, I lived with my aunt, working part-time at her diner while trying to finish high school. Those early years were tough. I was essentially a child raising a child. But Heather was my world, and I was determined to give her the best life I could. I worked multiple jobs, scraped by on food stamps, and eventually managed to get my GED and then a nursing degree. It wasn't easy, but we made it work. Heather and I developed an incredibly close bond through those years. We were a team, just the two of us against the world. As she grew older, I made sure to give her the stability and opportunities I never had. We had our rough patches, especially during her teenage years, but we always came back to each other. When Heather met Dennis 5 years ago, I was thrilled for her. He seemed like a great guy. Smart, funny, and he clearly adored my daughter. They got married 2 years ago in a beautiful ceremony. I'll never forget how happy Heather looked that day, and how proud I felt watching her start this new chapter of her life. Soon after the wedding, they announced they were expecting. I was over the moon. After years of it being just Heather and me, our little family was growing. When Tyler was born 18 months ago, it was one of the happiest days of my life. Holding that tiny bundle in my arms, I felt a love I hadn't experienced since I first held Heather. From the moment Tyler came home from the hospital, I was there to help. I'd visit at least 3 times a week, sometimes more if Heather needed me. I'd cook meals, do laundry, watch Tyler so the new parents could nap or have some alone time. Heather always seemed grateful for the help, and Dennis would often use my visits as an opportunity to go to the gym or catch up with friends. I loved those days with Tyler. Watching him grow and change week by week was magical. I'd sing him the same lullabies I used to sing to Heather, read him stories, and take him for walks in the park near their house. It felt like I was getting a second chance at those early years of motherhood, but this time with the wisdom and patience that comes with age. But about 3 months ago, things started to change. It was subtle at first. Heather began making excuses whenever I called to say I was coming over. Tyler had a play date, or they had plans with Dennis's family, or Heather wasn't feeling well. I tried not to read too much into it, but as the weeks went by, the excuses became more frequent and less convincing. I tried talking to Heather about it. I asked if everything was okay, if I had done something to upset her. She brushed off my concerns, saying I was overthinking things and that they were just busy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Heather I knew would have been honest with me if there was a problem. Last week, I decided I'd had enough of the avoidance. I called Heather and told her I was coming over. No excuses. She started to protest, saying Dennis wouldn't be home, but I cut her off and said I'd wait for Tyler to wake up from his nap if I had to. I hated being so forceful, but I was worried and frustrated. When I arrived at their house, Heather looked stressed and uncomfortable. She let me in butt of it anxiously as I played with Tyler in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, nothing like the warm, welcoming home I was used to. After about an hour, she abruptly said it was time for Tyler's lunch and started ushering me towards the door. That's when I put my foot down. I stood my ground and asked her what was really going on. Heather's face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw my little girl again, the one who used to come to me with all her problems. Then she dropped the bomb. She said Dennis thought I was spending too much time with Tyler and that it was interfering with their family bonding. I was stunned. Heather went on to say that Dennis felt like I was trying to take over as a parent and that Tyler was getting too attached to me. She said Dennis was worried that my frequent presence was preventing them from establishing their own family routines and parenting style. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I've always been careful not to overstep boundaries. I asked Heather if she felt the same way, and she hesitated before admitting that she sometimes felt overwhelmed by my presence. She said she appreciated my help, but she also wanted a chance to figure things out on her own. I left their house feeling hurt and confused. Had I really been so blind to their feelings? I've always had a good relationship with Dennis, or so I thought. We'd often chat and joke around during my visits. He'd seemed appreciative of my help, even encouraging me to come over more often when Heather was having a tough week. After a sleepless night, I decided to reach out to Dennis directly. I called him the next day and asked if we could meet for coffee to talk things over. He agreed, and we met at a local cafe the following afternoon. I was hoping for a calm, rational discussion, but it quickly became heated. Dennis accused me of undermining their parenting and said I was making Heather feel inadequate as a mother. He said they needed space to figure out their own parenting style without my constant interference. He even suggested that my eagerness to be involved with Tyler stemmed from my own experience as a teenage mother, implying that I was trying to relive my youth through my grandson. His words stung, especially because there was a grain of truth in them. I do sometimes look at Tyler and think about how different things could have been if I'd had more support when Heather was a baby. But I never meant to impose or interfere. I was just trying to be the supportive mother and grandmother I wished I'd had. I tried to explain my perspective, but Dennis wouldn't listen. He said if I couldn't respect their boundaries, they might have to limit my access to Tyler. The thought of being cut off from my grandson made my heart clench with fear. I left the cafe feeling devastated and angry. Now I'm at a loss for what to do. I've always prided myself on being a supportive mother, on having an open and honest relationship with Heather. We've been through so much together, and the thought of losing that connection is terrifying. And Tyler, the idea of not being able to watch him grow up, of becoming a stranger to him, is almost too painful to bear. Part of me wants to fight back, to insist on my right to be part of Tyler's life. After all, I'm his grandmother, and I've been there since day one. But I'm worried that if I push too hard, I'll only make things worse. The last thing I want is to cause problems for Heather and Dennis's marriage. I'm also grappling with feelings of guilt and self-doubt. Did I really overstep? Was I so caught up in reliving those early years of motherhood that I didn't notice I was intruding? Or is Dennis overreacting, possibly feeling threatened by my close relationship with Heather and Tyler? I keep replaying conversations and incidents in my mind, trying to pinpoint where things went wrong. Was it when I suggested a different bedtime routine when Tyler was having sleep issues? Or when I brought over homemade baby food because I was worried about the store-bought stuff they were using? I thought I was being helpful, but maybe I was sending the message that I didn't trust their parenting choices. I'm at a crossroads, and I don't know which way to turn. Should I back off completely and wait for them to reach out to me? Try to talk to Heather again, maybe without Dennis present? Stand my ground and insist on regular visits? I'm torn between my instinct to fight for my place in their lives and my fear of pushing them away entirely. The thought of losing my relationship with Tyler is breaking my heart. He's been such a bright spot in my life, a chance to experience the joy of a child without the overwhelming responsibility and fear I had with Heather. The idea of not being there to see his first steps, hear his first words, watch him grow into a little person with his own personality and quirks, it's almost unbearable. I could really use some advice on how to navigate this without damaging my relationships with my daughter and son-in-law. Has anyone else dealt with a similar situation? How did you handle it? I'm open to any suggestions at this point. I just want to find a way to be part of my grandson's life without causing more conflict. Update 1. It's been about a month since my last post, and I wanted to give an update on the situation with Heather, Dennis, and Tyler. A lot has happened, and I'm still trying to process it all. After reading through all of your comments and advice, I decided to take a step back and give Heather and Dennis some space. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. For 2 weeks, I didn't call or visit. I kept reminding myself that this was for the best, that I needed to respect their boundaries, but every day was a struggle. I'd find myself picking up the phone to call Heather, only to put it down again. I'd drive by their house on my way to the grocery store, fighting the urge to stop in just for a minute. During those 2 weeks, I tried to focus on myself. I joined a book club at the local library, something I'd been meaning to do for years but never found the time. I started taking evening walks with my neighbor, Carol. She's a widow about my age, and we've developed a nice friendship. It was good to have someone to talk to, someone who could offer a different perspective on the situation. I also spent a lot of time reflecting on my relationship with Heather over the years. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made as a young mother, the times I'd put her needs before my own. I remembered the challenges we'd faced together, the times we'd had to move because I couldn't make rent, the Christmases when I could only afford one small gift, the nights I'd come home exhausted from my second job only to help her with her homework. But I also thought about the good times, our movie nights cuddled up on the couch, the summer we spent camping because it was the only vacation we could afford, the pride I felt when she graduated high school and then college. Heather was my whole world for so long, and adjusting to her having her own family has been harder than I expected. After 2 weeks of silence, Heather called me. My heart leapt when I saw her name on the caller ID. She sounded hesitant and a bit nervous, but she asked if I wanted to come over for dinner that weekend. I agreed, trying to keep my excitement in check. When I arrived at their house on Saturday, the atmosphere was tense. Dennis barely made eye contact with me, and Heather seemed on edge. But Tyler, oh my sweet Tyler, he was thrilled to see me. He ran to me as soon as I walked in, babbling excitedly and showing me his new toys. In that moment, all the pain and uncertainty of the past weeks melted away. During dinner, we made awkward small talk about work and the weather. I told them about my book club, and Heather seemed genuinely interested. She asked about the book we were reading, and for a moment, it felt like old times, just the two of us chatting about literature like we used to. After we finished eating and Tyler was put to bed, Heather finally brought up the elephant in the room. She explained that she and Dennis had been feeling overwhelmed as new parents and that my frequent visits, while well-intentioned, had been adding to their stress. They felt like they couldn't establish their own routines and parenting style with me around so often. I listened carefully, trying to understand their perspective. When Heather finished, I apologized for overstepping and explained that I never meant to interfere. I just wanted to help and spend time with my grandson. I told her about how much I'd missed them over the past 2 weeks, how hard it had been to stay away. Dennis, who had been quiet up until this point, spoke up. He said he appreciated my apology, but he still felt like I didn't fully understand the impact of my actions. He brought up several instances where he felt I had undermined their parenting decisions or spoiled Tyler against their wishes. I was taken aback by some of his examples. He mentioned a time when I'd given Tyler a cookie before dinner, despite Heather telling him he couldn't have any sweets. I remembered the incident. Tyler had been crying, and I thought one small cookie wouldn't hurt. I hadn't realized how much it had bothered Dennis. We ended up having a long, sometimes heated discussion about boundaries and expectations. Dennis expressed feeling like he was competing with me for Heather and Tyler's affection. Heather admitted feeling torn between her roles as a daughter and a wife and mother. I shared my own fears about losing my place in their lives, about becoming a stranger to Tyler. I told them about my lonely childhood, how I'd always wanted a big, close-knit family, and how much it meant to me to be involved in Tyler's life. In the end, we came to an agreement. I would limit my visits to once a week on a day that works for all of us. I promised to respect their parenting decisions and to ask before bringing gifts for Tyler. In return, they agreed to keep me involved in Tyler's life and to communicate more openly if issues arise in the future. As I left their house that night, I felt a mix of emotions. I was relieved that we had finally talked things through, but I was also sad about the reduced time I would be spending with Tyler. Part of me still felt hurt by Dennis's words and attitude towards me. I couldn't help but feel like he was the one pushing for these changes, and I worried about his influence on my relationship with Heather and Tyler in the long term. It's been 2 weeks since that dinner, and we're still figuring things out. Our weekly visits have been a bit awkward, but I'm trying my best to respect their boundaries. Last week, when Tyler was having a tantrum, I had to stop myself from stepping in to soothe him. It was hard to watch Heather struggle, but I knew I needed to let her handle it her way. I miss the easy relationship I used to have with Heather. There's a distance between us now that wasn't there before. I hope we can rebuild that trust over time. I've started sending her text messages during the week, just quick notes to let her know I'm thinking of her. Sometimes she responds, sometimes she doesn't, but I'm trying not to read too much into it. I'm still struggling with feelings of resentment towards Dennis. I can't help but feel like he's the one who pushed for these changes. I worry about his influence on Heather and whether he truly understands the depth of our relationship. But I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt and to see things from his perspective. For now, I'm focusing on making the most of my limited time with Tyler and finding fulfillment in other areas of my life. My book club has become a highlight of my week, and I've started volunteering at a local animal shelter. It's not the same as being with my family, but it helps fill the time. I'm trying to stay positive and hope that things will improve with time, but there's a part of me that worries this is just the beginning of a larger drift apart. Only time will tell, I suppose. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time and cherishing every moment I get with my daughter and grandson. Update 2. It's been about 3 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some developments in the situation with Heather, Dennis, and Tyler. I wish I could say things have improved, but unfortunately, I've noticed some concerning changes that have me worried. The once-a-week visits have continued as agreed, but the atmosphere during these visits has become increasingly tense. Heather seems stressed and on edge, often checking her phone anxiously and rushing to end our visits early. Tyler, now 21 months old, has started to have more tantrums, especially when it's time for me to leave. It breaks my heart to see him so upset, and I can't help but wonder if the reduced contact is affecting him. Last week, I arrived for my usual visit to find Heather in tears. At first, she tried to brush it off, saying she was just tired, but after some gentle prodding, she finally opened up. What she told me has me deeply concerned. According to Heather, Dennis has become increasingly controlling over the past few months. He monitors her phone calls and text messages, including our communications. He's also been critical of her parenting, often comparing her unfavorably to his own mother. Heather said he's been making comments about how she's not as nurturing or patient as his mom, and how Tyler would be better behaved if she were a better mother. I was shocked and worried. This behavior didn't align with the Dennis I thought I knew. Yes, he had been firm about wanting to establish boundaries with me, but this level of control and criticism towards Heather was alarming. I asked Heather if she felt safe, and she assured me she did, but she admitted she was unhappy and felt trapped. I suggested that she consider talking to a counselor or maybe even taking some time apart from Dennis to clear her head. Heather became defensive, insisting that they could work things out on their own. She made me promise not to say anything to Dennis or anyone else about our conversation. I reluctantly agreed, but the whole situation left me feeling uneasy. I've tried to be more observant during my visits. I've noticed that Dennis is almost always present now, hovering in the background and interjecting frequently. He seems to be micromanaging Heather's interactions with Tyler, often correcting her or taking over tasks. I've seen Heather's confidence visibly deflate when this happens, and it reminds me painfully of how she used to shrink into herself when she was bullied in middle school. The dynamic between Heather and Dennis reminds me uncomfortably of my own parents' relationship before they split up. My father was controlling and critical, always finding fault with my mother's decisions. It took her years to build up the courage to leave him. I don't want Heather to go through the same thing, but I also know I can't make decisions for her. Yesterday, I received a call from Heather's best friend, Lisa. We've known Lisa since she and Heather were in high school together. She was worried because Heather had been canceling plans and seemed withdrawn lately. Lisa asked if I knew what was going on. I was torn about what to say. I didn't want to betray Heather's trust, but I also felt like Lisa might be able to help. In the end, I told Lisa that I had noticed some changes too and suggested she try to spend some one-on-one time with Heather. I didn't share the details of what Heather had told me, but I encouraged Lisa to be there for her and to keep an eye out for any red flags. Now, I'm grappling with what to do next. Should I confront Dennis about his behavior? Try to talk to Heather again about getting help? Reach out to other family members or friends for support? I'm worried that if I push too hard, I might lose what little access I have to Heather and Tyler. But I'm also terrified of standing by and watching my daughter's spirit be crushed. I keep thinking back to when Heather was little, how fiercely independent and strong-willed she was. She was the kid who insisted on tying her own shoes even when it took 10 minutes, who stood up to bullies twice her size on the playground. Seeing her now, doubting herself and shrinking away from conflict, it's like watching a light slowly being dimmed. I'm also worried about Tyler. Children are perceptive, and I can't help but wonder how the tension in the house is affecting him. Will he grow up thinking it's normal for a father to constantly criticize a mother? Will he internalize Dennis's perfectionist standards and always feel like he's falling short? Part of me wants to just swoop in and take Heather and Tyler away from the situation, but I know that's not realistic or helpful. Heather needs to make her own decisions, and I need to find a way to support her without overstepping or pushing her away. I'm feeling lost and overwhelmed. Every instinct I have as a mother is screaming at me to protect my child, but I know that Heather is an adult now and I can't fight her battles for her. I'm trying to balance being supportive with respecting her autonomy, but it's a difficult line to walk. Any advice on how to navigate this delicate situation would be greatly appreciated. How can I help Heather see that this situation isn't healthy without alienating her? Is there a way to address my concerns with Dennis without making things worse? I feel like I'm walking on eggshells and I'm terrified of making the wrong move. Update 3. It's been a difficult few weeks since my last update, and I'm still trying to process everything that's happened. The situation with Heather, Dennis, and Tyler has come to a head in a way I never expected, and we're all reeling from the fallout. About 2 weeks ago, I received a frantic call from Heather in the middle of the night. She was sobbing and barely coherent, but I managed to understand that she needed help. My heart racing, I threw on some clothes and rushed over to her house, not knowing what I would find. When I arrived, I found Heather sitting on the front porch with Tyler in her arms and a hastily packed bag at her feet. Dennis was nowhere to be seen. Heather told me between sobs that she had finally reached her breaking point. Dennis had become physically aggressive during an argument, shoving her against a wall. She grabbed Tyler and left immediately. I brought them both back to my house, where Heather slowly opened up about the extent of Dennis's controlling and abusive behavior over the past few months. It was far worse than I had imagined, and I felt a mixture of guilt for not realizing sooner and relief that she had finally left. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. We filed a police report and got a temporary restraining order against Dennis. I helped Heather contact a lawyer to discuss her options for divorce and custody arrangements. We also reached out to a domestic violence support group for additional resources and guidance. Heather is still staying with me, and we're taking things one day at a time. Some days are better than others. Heather alternates between feeling empowered and determined, and then crumbling under the weight of guilt and self-doubt. She keeps questioning whether she's overreacting, whether she should give Dennis another chance for Tyler's sake. It's heartbreaking to watch her struggle, but I'm trying my best to support her and remind her of her strength. Tyler has been clingy and fussy, clearly affected by the stress and changes in his environment. He asks for his daddy sometimes, and it's hard to know how to respond. We're doing our best to maintain a sense of normalcy for him, sticking to familiar routines as much as possible. I'm doing my best to support them both, but it's challenging. I'm angry at Dennis for what he's done, and I'm struggling with my own feelings of guilt for not recognizing the signs earlier. At the same time, I'm trying to stay strong for Heather and Tyler. It reminds me of those early days when Heather was a baby, and I was constantly exhausted but pushing through because she needed me. We've had to set some firm boundaries with Dennis's family, who have been pressuring Heather to reconcile with him. They claim it's all a misunderstanding and that Heather is overreacting. It's been difficult, but I'm proud of Heather for standing her ground. She's showing glimpses of that strong-willed little girl I remember, and it gives me hope. Looking back, I can see how Dennis's controlling behavior extended to limiting my time with Tyler and Heather. While I still regret the lost time, I'm grateful that I maintained enough of a relationship with Heather that she felt she could turn to me in her moment of need. For now, we're focused on healing and moving forward. Heather has started counseling, and we're looking into play therapy options for Tyler. I'm doing my best to provide a stable, loving environment for both of them as we navigate this difficult time. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know that we'll face it together as a family. There are still many challenges ahead. Legal battles, co-parenting issues, helping Tyler understand the changes in his life. But for the first time in months, I feel like we're moving in the right direction. Thank you to everyone who has offered advice and support throughout this journey. Your words have been a source of strength and comfort during this challenging time.